All right, so today we are talking about pregnancy. Our goals for today is to be able to describe what happens from ovulation to implantation. We've already talked about that pretty much. We're going to go over it again. Difference between a zygote, an embryo, and a fetus, and then describe what has to happen in order for this fetus to properly develop. So first thing we're going to write down is that human pregnancy lasts about 40 weeks. It depends on when you count or when you calculate this. So some sites will say 30 weeks or 38 weeks. Some will say 40. And it basically depends on if you're trying to count the weeks since implantation or if you start counting from the date of your last period. So it can be 38 to 40 depending on how different people count it. Different textbooks, different doctors count it slightly differently, but around 40 weeks. So what happens first is a sperm and an egg combine and they form a zygote. So zygote is the cell that comes from the fusion of the sperm and the egg. And it has 46 chromosomes because remember 23 from the egg, 23 from the sperm. It's a very, very tiny, tiny cell. And that's what first happens. So we're talking 24 hours after ovulation, when that sperm is fertilizing the egg, the zygote results. So fertilized egg is called a zygote. Eventually, after it's been fertilized and it's a zygote, it's dividing. Remember mitosis, division of cells? It's dividing to form a ball of cells here. And once it forms that ball of cells as it's traveling down here, it's going to implant. It's already a ball of cells that's got many different cells in it by the time it implants on day 7, 8, or 9. So what happens if the fertilized egg doesn't implant in the correct spot? This is what we call an ectopic pregnancy. This is added into the notes packet for this year. So if you don't have this written on your notes packet, you can just add it somewhere where you've got room. So an ectopic pregnancy is when a fertilized egg then implants in another location. And most often this happens in a fallopian tube. So remember, our ovaries are the size of an almond. So this is not very big. And it's not a muscle, it's not very stretchy. So can you imagine if a baby grew here, what would happen is this tube would eventually burst. The uterus is stretchy and can grow and accommodate a growing baby, but the fallopian tube can't. And if it bursts, it's super dangerous. So the egg's not going to survive there because it implants there. And then also it can be dangerous for the mom as well. I have known people who have had ectopic pregnancies, and sometimes what has to happen is they actually have to remove your ovaries and fallopian tubes on that side. All right, so eventually we get to a blastocyst, which is what's going to implant into the lining. So this is the ball of cells that's going to implant there. And when it implants, then it triggers this hormone to be made. And this hormone is the one that's detected on the pregnancy test. So you can't detect a pregnancy until this hormone has been made or until the egg implants. And this tells basically the corpus luteum, the leftover egg, to keep making progesterone and basically maintain the pregnancy. Because without this, our progesterone levels might decrease and we don't want our lining to shed. So you'll notice here, this is a normal cycle. We see the peak in ovulation. Normally, the levels of progesterone and estrogen are going to decrease, and then that causes somebody to have their period here. But in pregnancy, notice progesterone and estrogen keep increasing to keep that uterine lining thick for the egg so it doesn't get shed. And then also we have HCG here, which is starting to increase. So we go from a zygote to a little ball of cells, and then we develop, and we call it an embryo. By now it looks like a little tadpole or a little organism, and this is when the major organs begin to develop. This is a really critical point in development because all of the organs are developing. And so when they talk about avoiding alcohol and avoiding drugs and certain things, this is really like one of the most crucial times for that to happen. And also to make sure you have all the vitamins and taking a vitamin, because all the major structures are starting to develop here. It's also when miscarriage rates are highest. All right, fetus, weeks 9 to 40. So basically when it starts looking like a little baby, we call it a fetus. And there's lots of developmental changes that happen along those ways. So on your notes packet, you've got some diagrams. So we're going to label zygote. Remember, that's the fertilized egg. Blastocyst. You can think blastocyst and ball of cells. Both start with a B. Then we got a little embryo, and then fetus. So when the baby is in the uterus, there's a membrane that forms called the amnion. Sometimes you'll hear it called the amniotic sac. And basically, it is filled with fluid, and that protects the baby. Really, really rarely, basically what happens sometimes is that babies are born en caul, which means they're born in the sac. So normally what happens is the sac breaks. Maybe you've heard of people say their water breaks. So normally that sac breaks, but on occasion, sometimes it doesn't. And the baby is born fully enclosed, and so we can actually see it in there. And so this is all filled with fluid to protect the baby. Now, when the baby comes out, it's covered in this vernix. It's like a waxy film, and it's kind of to protect the baby's skin. It develops inside the uterus, and so that they usually towel off the baby when it comes out because it's got all of this waxy stuff. But you guys know that when you're in the bathtub, you get all pruny and stuff. And so this waterproof protectant kind of prevents the skin from getting all gross. So in our little diagram, we're going to label that there's fluid in here. So this is just pointing to the fluid, and that this is the amnion, or also known as the amniotic sac. The placenta. All right. So the placenta inside of this amnion, part of this sac is this placenta, and it attaches to the umbilical cord. So the placenta is literally an organ, and it allows substances to be exchanged between mom's blood and the baby's blood. So there's all these blood vessels here, but they connect to mom's blood vessels. And so that way, when you eat food and you get nutrients, they can pass through the placenta and then go through the umbilical cord to the baby so the baby can get nutrients. This is also why if you're drinking alcohol or taking drugs, it's going into your bloodstream, then it's going into the placenta, then it's going into the baby. So after you give birth, the baby comes out, and then actually you have to give birth to this whole thing too. Normally people don't really think about that, but it has to happen. So as you can see in here, here's the little placenta. It attaches to the uterus, and it's got veins in it. The umbilical cord has artery and veins. And this is how waste and oxygen and nutrients get passed between the mom and the baby. And so then you can see here's the placenta blood cells, but here's mom's blood cells as well. So it allows fetus to get oxygen and nutrients and remove waste. And then the placenta also makes hormones. So remember progesterone to keep our lining thick, or HCG. So the placenta helps make hormones that help maintain that pregnancy. So we're going to label the placenta here. Notice this is attached to the uterus here. So it's attached to the lining of the uterus. And then the last thing we have to do is talk about the umbilical cord. So the umbilical cord connects to your belly button or the navel. You have to cut it when a baby is born. Here's an example of an umbilical cord. It has one artery and two veins. And this is how the good stuff, is going to get from the mom or from the placenta to the baby. So essentially, remember this placenta has blood vessels that can connect with mom's blood vessels, and then the umbilical cord delivers it to the baby. oxygen, nutrients, all of those things. So technically, the baby is underwater. It's swimming in this fluid. It's not breathing, and it doesn't have to breathe because it's getting oxygen through the umbilical cord. So then we're just going to label the umbilical cord here. Just a fun thing to look at the end here. Here's a picture of normal organs. These are your intestines if you were to like slice them. So intestines, we've got stomach, liver, and this is where they are with a baby growing inside. So all the intestines get pushed up here. Notice the bladder down here. So bladder gets really squished. And so I just think it's a cool diagram.